They're in the back.
Are we ready? Okay. Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It is December 8th, 2014. Madam Clerk, have we met all the noticing requirements necessary for this meeting?
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you. And please call the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Here.
Ms. Crommeller?
Here.
Mr. Miller is absent. Mr. Liverman?
Here.
Ms. Butler?
Here.
Mr. Simon?
Here.
And Mayor Lempert.
Here. And now please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And the first item on our agenda this evening are approval of two sets of minutes, September 15th, closed session, and October 13th, 2014. Are there any changes or comments on the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Liverman.
Second.
And seconded by Ms. Crommeller. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the minutes, both sets of minutes passed unanimously. And now I'd like to open the floor for comments from the public on any items that are not already on the agenda. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. We have two proclamations.
I have a comment. My comment now?
Yeah, sure.
I have a comment. This is kind of strange. If I was a regular citizen, I would have stand here to make a comment. A regular citizen meaning someone that's not sitting on council. But I thought it was appropriate to make this statement. When I was growing up here in Princeton, I was a member of the YMCA Ranger Camp. And the Rangers were a group of boys that were trained how to respond to emergencies and taught how to avoid dangers. While training how to canoe on Lake Carnegie, a fellow camper's canoe tipped over. The only thing I heard was, "I cannot breathe, I cannot breathe." I jumped in the water and pulled Johnny, his name was Johnny Watson, out of the water. He thanked me for saving his life. And the simple asking for help in a dangerous situation is what I was taught to respond to as a young child. This past week, and this is the reason why I read this, my 9-year-old daughter asked me why the policeman could not let Eric Garner up when he said, "I could not breathe." And my daughter also said, other people could have helped them too. My heart is full and broken over what seemingly appears to be excuses for some police brutality. You don't have to be a brain surgeon like my sister-in-law or nuclear space physicist to understand our system of justice for all is in trouble. And to many law-abiding residents of this great country, law-abiding ones, when looking at the recent acquittals of police officers in the Mike Brown killing and the Eric Garner killing, their hearts are broken too. I'd like to publicly thank the law-abiding protesters for raising attention to what appears to be a pothole in our highway of justice. I am convinced that we will get through this and even have a better justice system. I would also like to take the time to thank the Princeton Police Department for being light years ahead of so many other police departments. The hiring of police officers that look like the community has been a major drive for our police department. Sensitivity training to be more aware of cultures and other people's beliefs are also accepted and implemented by our police department. The understanding that undocumented residents are people too is such a positive and forward future thinking concept. Chief Setter has gone above and beyond to accommodate our many communities in Princeton. The council understands and respects our police department, And we are lucky, and I know I shouldn't say this, but blessed to live in Princeton during these troubling days. Thank you.
Thank you, Lance. Very well said. Thank you for that. We have two proclamations tonight. The first one is Communities of Light, and as you walked into the building tonight, you probably saw the beautiful luminaries that were set out, and I wanted to thank our Public Works Department and our Police Department for helping to set those up. Whereas it is the policy of Princeton to recognize organizations that have contributed to the overall benefit of the community, and whereas Women's Space, founded in 1977, has demonstrated a unique ability to provide comfort, support services, crisis intervention, and safety to women who are victims of sexual assault and domestic violence, and whereas Women's Space, in the belief that peace begins at home, has asked the Mercer County community to join them in their struggle against violence toward women by participating in their annual Communities of Light project. And whereas Princeton applauds the efforts of Women's Space to bring an end to the circle of abuse imposed on women, and whereas as mayor of Princeton, I urge that each and every household demonstrate their support of the concept of peace begins at home by placing luminaries along their driveways and sidewalks on Monday, December 8, 2014, as a visible symbol of that support. And whereas the proceeds from Communities of Light 2014 will be used to fund vital services for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. Now, therefore, I, Liz Lempert, Mayor of Princeton, County of Mercer, State of New Jersey, do hereby proclaim December 8, 2014, as Communities of Light Day in Princeton, and hereby commend Women's Space on its many accomplishments and wish them continued success with Communities of Light in the years to come. And our second proclamation for this evening is to support the Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over campaign. Whereas impaired drivers on our nation's roads kill more than 10,000 people each year and cost our society more than $37 billion annually. And whereas 22% of motor vehicle fatalities in New Jersey in 2013 were alcohol-related, and whereas an enforcement crackdown is planned to combat impaired driving, and whereas the season at the end of the year is traditionally a time of social gatherings, which often include alcohol, and whereas the State of New Jersey Division of Highway Traffic Safety has asked law enforcement agencies throughout the state to participate in the Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over year-end holiday crackdown, and whereas the project will involve increased impaired driving enforcement from December 5th, 2014 through January 2nd, 2015, and whereas an increase in impaired driving enforcement and a reduction in impaired driving will save lives on our roadways. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Princeton declares its support for the Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over 2014 year-end holiday crackdown from December 5th, 2014 through January 2nd, 2015, and pledges to increase awareness of the dangers of drinking and driving. Okay. And now we come to the fun part of our meeting, which is our employee awards for the year. And I have to say, we are really lucky to have such a fabulous staff. And one of the signs of how great our staff is the length of terms of some of the service to the community. So tonight's a night to celebrate that. And I think we're all going to go down so we can hand out awards and shake everyone's hand. So give us a second to get assembled down there.
Oh, should we shake hands? Because Lucy said we should.
You should just bow or something.
Are you serious?
Yes.
All right. There's our health consultant up here has recommended because it's a flu season that we keep our distance. But I'm happy to shake everyone's hand. I'm healthy, and I'll let everybody else decide what they want to do. right. Our first awards are for 5 years of service, and I'd like to call up Shahid Abdul Karim from the Police Department. Axel Soto, Road Repair. And not attending tonight is Neil Hunter from Police Dispatch. And now we have our... And now for our 10-year awards, George Cumberbatch, Parking Meter Maintenance. John Hughes from SOC. Richard McGee, Road Repair. Anastasia Ryan, Recreation. Edwin Racinos, Parking Meter Maintenance. And not attending tonight, who are also celebrating their 10-year anniversary, are Corey Bishara and Jeffrey Hughes from SOC, Kathy Monzo, Administration, and Nelson Morale, Road Repair. And now for the 15-year awards, Jonathan Bukhari, Police. And I'd say we hire people when they're teenagers. So, Janet Pellicaro, Recycling Coordinator.
Thank you. Thank you.
And not attending tonight, Adania Blanco from Court, Robert Brusheye, retired from administration. Edward R. Huber from road repair. Maria O'Connell, police. John Luck, police dispatch. All right, now we're on to 20 years. Larry Churchwell, vehicle maintenance. Eileen Cutronio from planning.
Making it difficult, but we are a team.
Carrie Phillip from planning. And Lee Solo from planning. James Martinez, please. Jorge Navarez from police. So clearly working for the municipality keeps you young. So, and I think we have everybody. Chris Torres, road repair. Diane Lassick, this 25 years. Diane Lassick from police. Another 25 years, Christine Lundowski. And another 25 years, but not attending tonight, Meta Mukul from parking meter maintenance. And now this is pretty amazing. This is 30-year anniversary working for the municipality. Clifford Harmon, Shade Tree. And finally tonight, Bill Urian, Public Works. All right. Thank you, everybody.
It only took me 25 years to get it right.
All right, are you ready? All right. Okay, we're going to continue on with our meeting tonight, and I'm going to ask for council reports. Ms. Howard, do you want to start us off?
Well, I want to start by thanking Lance for setting a really important tone tonight. I think this is a time of reflection around the country, and I'm so glad that you opened us up tonight talking. And just a report in that vein is that I had reported last Monday that the town was co-sponsoring along with St. Paul's Church and various nonprofits that we would be hosting an information session on the President's executive order on immigration. And that meeting was happening while we were having our council meeting last Monday, but almost 200 people attended that meeting last Monday. So a lot of interest across the town, and so we've set up another meeting for late in January to do another information session, and we'll have lawyers there who can answer questions from the public who are obviously very interested in how they can apply under the President's executive order. So we'll continue to look for ways, and I see in the audience Amber DeLeon was one of the organizers, and it was really a terrific meeting and meeting a real need in the community. So as Lance said, we all have heavy hearts now given what's been happening around the country, but I think we can look for opportunities here to meet the needs of our citizens and to continue to find ways to make our town as humane as possible, and look for inspiration even in some of these tragedies. Thank you.
Ms. Krummeller? Ms. Livner?
No report.
Ms. Butler?
I'm not sure whether I've reported on this, but since the freeholders met here, they approved the funding for the Mary Moss Park, and we'll have a preliminary meeting this coming week for the subcommittee to kind of spearhead the planning for that park. That's it.
That's great news.
Yay.
Mr. Simon?
No report.
Okay. I have several reports. The first one, there was a meeting with Lytle Street neighbors. Councilman Krummeller was there, along with myself, Mr. Kaiser, Deanna Stockton, and Sergeant Murray from the police department. And the consensus from that neighborhood, Lytle Street, for whatever reason, they're one of the few streets down in the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood that doesn't have any parking restrictions on their street, and as a result, they're getting overrun with people parking there all day long. So the consensus from the neighborhood was that they'd like to see 2-hour parking limit on the street combined with a permit system for the residents. And I know that's something that's going to be worked on by the parking group, and next year, I think 2015 is going to be the year of looking at our parking ordinances. But this was one of the first steps of getting some community input on that. Second is there's an energy working group that's, we've had a couple meetings, and there's a resolution about this later on our agenda, but it's been representatives of Sustainable Princeton, the municipality, the school district, and the library getting together to share information and to and to talk about especially some of the solar projects that each of our individual organizations are working on. And on the municipality's end, we've been talking about reviving a plan that had been put on the shelf for the last few years because of the market for solar has been poor, but now that it's reviving, to look again at that plan to put a solar farm out on the old landfill at River Road. And again, that's something that will probably be coming to council early in 2015. Just a reminder that there have been several tree lightings over the past week, which means that it is shopping season for the holidays, and I just want to encourage everybody. I see there's some merchants out here tonight, but this is a great time of year to support our local merchants and to buy local. And there's lots of great stuff being sold, so if anybody wants to get me a gift, buy it locally. That's not a message necessarily to people in this room, but if anybody's watching on TV. There was a successful event last year that the university students put on, the Truck Fest, if everybody remembers, and they're going to be doing it again this year, and the date is going to be Saturday, April 25th. That's the day before Communiversity, from 2 to 6 p.m. And again, it's going to be on Prospect, and they are raising the money there, and it will go towards organizations that are working against hunger and food insecurity. And it's a really great group of students, really enthusiastic, so they're trying to make it even bigger and better than last year. And then to follow up on Lance's comment, I participated in a White House conference call last week regarding Ferguson, and the Obama administration is committing resources to strengthen community policing. So they've committed $263 million, some of which is to help communities buy body cameras, and the rest of it is to strengthen community policing efforts. The president is also going to be creating a task force for 21st century policing. One of the interesting things I learned on that call was that there hasn't been a federal review of policing in this country since the Johnson administration. So, it's about time to take another look and to make sure that our police are not just fighting crime, but enforcing the Constitution and upholding everybody's rights. And I just want to echo both my colleagues up here has said that it reminded me how fortunate we are that our police department has really been ahead of the curve on this issue. And I wanted to recognize the efforts of Chief Sutter, I don't know if he's still here or not, and Police Commissioner Howard, and the entire council for making a real commitment to community policing and to our Safe Neighborhoods unit, and to help make our department what we want it to be, which is a department that's of the community and for the community. And finally, I just want to remind everybody I'm having Meet the Mayor hours this Friday from 8:30 to 10 a.m. in the lobby of the Princeton Public Library. And anyone's welcome to come with a concern. You don't have to make an appointment. It's just an informal place for anybody to come talk to me or just to say hi. So I'll be there Friday morning. And with that, let's see if there's any staff reports. Mr. Shield?
Mayor and Council, I want to report today there are about 300 protesters out on Mercer Street, and I just want to commend the police department and their professionalism in handling the situation. It's a model for everyone, so I do want to commend them for the work that they do.
Thank you. Mr. Kaiser, any reports?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple items I'd like to report on. One is relating to the DM Breezy property. Council had awarded the contract for the demolition of the home. I'm pleased to report that the asbestos has been removed, the 2 wells have been capped, the septic systems have been filled, and the demolition of the homes will take place as soon as we receive the appropriate letters from the utility companies. So that work is moving ahead right on schedule. Secondly, with regard to the hospital work, the team of John Pettinati, Jeff Grosser, Jack West, our land use engineer, and myself, we've been meeting with the hospital group, the Avalon Bay people, Unuzi people, on a regular basis. And I'd like to report that on Wednesday and Thursday this week, the group plans to remove the 2-story structure along Witherspoon Street. That's the great building right along Witherspoon that has the bridge going to the building that's going to remain, and they anticipate that taking 2 days to be removed. And when it's removed, the police are coordinating with them to close the sidewalk between Franklin and Henry during that 2-day period. In addition, we've been following up regarding the overall demolition of the large buildings. The only large building left is the 7-story building, which is right at the corner of Henry and Witherspoon. And they're in the process of removing that, working from the east to the west. There have been some concerns from neighbors regarding noise that's occurred on site, and as a result, we've been working closely with the health department. The health department, in turn, has been in touch with the Mercer County Health Department, who's going to be on site checking sound readings in the area and taking appropriate action if warranted. In addition, there were some concerns of debris, and as a result, the Avalon Bay and Unuzi people are going around the neighborhood on a daily basis, picking up anything, and also they've been advised if we have windy situations to not work the higher elevations of the building, but the lower elevations of the building. The 7-story building that they're working on now, they're looking to have that down within the next 5 to 6 weeks, weather depending. Of course, if we have blizzard conditions and so forth, work would have to stop. But the project's moving along, and we're monitoring it very closely, and we have a good team that's watching over things.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, can I follow up on that? The way the holidays fall this year, we've got Christmas on a Thursday, and we also have New Year's Day on a Thursday, and so I think people will be extending their at-home times, and I hope in the conversations maybe we could indicate we would be pleased if they could hold down the noise on Fridays of those particular days, if that's possible. I know time is money, but if there can be, any way that they can schedule their work such that it's not quite as noisy around those days.
Administrator DeShield was on site this morning and made that very request.
And did they seem like they would be responsive, or there was anything they could do, or did they kind of tell you to go pound sand?
As you indicated, they're going back and they're really taking it under advisement. They have not returned whether, how they're going to do it, but they need to look and see in terms of what the cost will be on their end. So we hope to hear from them shortly.
I mean, we're not asking them to stop completely, but if they can just...
Yes, and then I'm sure they'll work with us. They've been very willing to work with us. So
okay, thank you.
That will happen.
Great, thank you. Are there any other staff reports? Okay. All right, so now we're going to turn to our public hearings for this evening. The first one is an ordinance setting forth regulations relating to historic preservation and amending the Code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968. And I wanted to start with the Planning Board historic referral response. I didn't see that, maybe I missed it, but I didn't see that in the packet.
Mine didn't attach to, or, didn't link to the report.
So was that just the report from the Planning Board after having reviewed this?
Yes, it is attached.
It
I
didn't,
didn't see the ordinance or that.
it didn't link, nor was the ordinance linked.
I checked this afternoon, and it's reattached, it is there.
The ordinance, it wasn't in our, in the PDF
Well,
packet.
the ordinance we had from a previous meeting, but could someone summarize?
This afternoon,
Okay.
both went in, they were reattached, and they were there.
Okay, can someone summarize the planning board?
Well, I do have, it's a very short memo from Eileen Cotroneo, so I'll just read it.
That would be terrific, thank you.
This is from Eileen Cotroneo. The subject is the Historic Preservation Ordinance that Council had referred to the Planning Board. At its regular meeting on December 4th, 2014, the Historic Preservation Ordinance was discussed and reviewed by the Princeton Planning Board. The board unanimously endorsed the ordinance and found it to be consistent with the Princeton Community Master Plan. The Planning Board wishes to thank Princeton Council for providing them with the opportunity to review this ordinance.
Okay, terrific. And did you have anything to add to that as a planning board
No, it
representative?
wasn't very complicated.
Okay, great. And so if there are no other further questions or clarifications from council, I know when we introduced it, we had a fairly long, detailed presentation on it. I don't know if there's any further questions or if we're ready to open up the public hearing.
I just wanted to, Mayor, just for the record, there were some revisions that were made to the version of the ordinance that was introduced, but I believe that the planning board attorney had reviewed those with the council in thorough detail before the ordinance was actually introduced. But I just want to make sure that everyone on the council recognizes that.
And those changes are in the one that's, the current one that's on the website right now?
I believe that's the case.
Okay.
Yes. They should be.
I see Jerry Muller. Could we invite you up to the table? I'm sorry? Oh, sure.
Are there any questions for Mr. Muller, Mr. Solo?
Actually, I do have a question. Jerry, we have heard from some concerned citizens about the idea that homes or sites that are on the national or state register, the way we've written the ordinance, it says that they would get consideration. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yes. This was discussed in some detail at the Historic Preservation Commission and ZARC, and before the Planning Board, and at the Code Subcommittee of Council. The Battlefield Society had suggested some language, including language like special consideration.
Right.
And what we decided to do with that, we really thought that was so subjective that it really didn't mean very much. So what we put in the ordinance was a provision saying that if the Historic Preservation Commission or whoever was reviewing it thought, particularly the Historic Preservation Commission, rejected applications by residents for inclusion of new sites that were on the register, that they had to give their reasons for doing so. And we thought that was probably a better way of addressing this, because what it really said is, hey, if you have something before you that's on the national and state register, you really have to think about this and have to be able to articulate why you didn't think it was a good idea, recommending to council that an historic district be created for, or an historic feature or structure or site be designated. So that was the way we addressed it. We thought that was probably a better way of doing it, would be more effective.
Thank you.
Okay. Can we open up the public hearing? Are there any more questions from council? Okay. All right, with that, I'd like to open up the public hearing, and if for anybody who would like to speak on this ordinance, if you can just line up behind the microphone. And Council President Miller is not here tonight, so Ms. Kremiller has been drafted to be the timekeeper. Yeah, just come on up and...
Hi, Mayor Lampert and members of Princeton Council. My name is Christine Lewandowski, and until 8 days ago, I was your Historic Preservation Officer. I am here supporting the adoption of the Historic Preservation Ordinance. Since I worked on it for 2.5 years, I can tell you why you should adopt it. The ordinance is the joining of two former municipalities' ordinances. Is it a perfect ordinance? No. But all of us learned in philosophy class that there is no such thing as perfection. Is it a good ordinance? It's a very good ordinance. It eliminates confusion on the part of the staff and confusion upon the part of the public who have to deal with two ordinances all the time. It takes the best of both ordinances and clarifies details. It adds important sections that neither ordinances had. Can it be improved upon when certain situations come to light? Yes. But needing to make additions in the future is no excuse to not adopt it now. Why is now a good time? Well, Princeton can apply to become a certified local government, a CLG. This is a federal certifying program that certifies local ordinances. Both the borough and the township, both the former borough and the former township, were certified local governments. And for the past 2 years, they have not been. This certification affords special technical assistance to the town from the New Jersey Office of Historic Preservation. It also makes the town eligible for grant money which both towns have gotten in the past. Sorry, I'll be very quick. Both former municipalities were eligible for the grant money before, and adopting the ordinance will make the municipality eligible again. The press, the public are all watching Princeton's consolidation. Princeton should make the world know that it cares about its historic structures, its historic landscapes, its historic districts. It's the right thing to do for the citizens of this town, and thank you very much for having the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, for all your hard work on this.
Thank you.
Just for the future, when I hold up 1 minute, it means you have 1 minute left. I didn't mean because you were rushing. You didn't have to rush it quite as much as you thought.
Right. My name is Julie Capozzoli, and I'm chair of the Historic Preservation Commission, and I've been working with Christine for many years and now with Elizabeth Kim. And I know that our subcommittee from the township started working on this in 2011, 12, something like that. When the word consolidation popped up, we started working on it with the HPRC from the borough. So this has really been thought out. I echo all of Christine's support for the ordinance, and I'm not half as articulate as she is. So anyway, I urge you to pass the ordinance, and let's move on.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak?
Kip Cherry, I'm representing the Battlefield Society, and I'm extremely pleased about the changes that have been made and the improvement that you just discussed today about the sites already on the National Register. There is one other area that we've discussed before, and I'm going to hit it one more time, and that's the issue about the definition of an historic site, which is a very broad definition under state law. And we would like to recommend that in addition be added to the language that's there, which relates to the state definition, plus we added a definition related to whether a site is in the master plan. But on top of that, we would like to add additional language that says, or included on a comprehensive reference list of historic sites to be prepared and maintained by the Historic Preservation Commission pursuant to Section 10B 376D as amended. As you know, the master plan list is missing many important sites. I'm sure you've all looked at the list that's in the master plan, which is what is referenced in our proposed ordinance. We need a comprehensive list of all historic sites in our town not just those that are designated, but all that are historic. For instance, in the master plan for the Witherspoon neighborhood, which we're looking at becoming an historic district, the master plan lists only 6 historic sites. Now, we all know there are many more sites in that neighborhood than 6, but that's all that's in the master plan. Also, I have mentioned before that the Tulane site, which is eligible to be on the National Register, is not on the master plan list, nor is the prehistoric site on the Ridge. So the list is very defective. And what we are suggesting is that under Section 10B 376D, Powers and Functions, that there be an insert to require the preparation of the comprehensive reference list that I'm mentioning. And this list should include all historic sites located within the municipality of Princeton, listed by address, listing the approximate construction or creation date, and any historic preservation designation. And that should actually have a deadline, such as April 30th. Now, this is not a list proposed in the master plan. This is not a list of designated sites. This is just a pool of all the sites that we know. And as Mr. Mueller has said many times, we need to be able to tell developers what are the historic sites. And we need to be able to tell owners and buyers and the Historic Preservation Commission and ourselves, we all need to know what are the historic sites that should be considered by the Historic Preservation Commission or by the Planning Board in due process, whether or not they're protected by local designation. So I really encourage this addition to ask the Historic Preservation Commission to come up with a comprehensive list. Finally, there should be a use of that list for reporting to the Historic Preservation Commission what buildings are being considered for demolition, and also under the issue of the archaeological protocol, there should be an addition of a Phase 1 archaeology investigation. We're leading into now a big step. We're going into a major step of looking at heritage tourism and historic preservation for our town. With a consolidated town, we really need to have a list. So I really encourage you to think really strongly about making sure that we have a really good list. Thanks.
Thank you. Yep.
Good evening. Shirley Satterfield, Quarry Street. Have you noticed that when you cross Paul Robeson Place, the area from Jackson Street to Birch Avenue does not look like Witherspoon Street from Nassau to Wiggin Street? The street lights are different. The sidewalks are in disrepair. There are no holiday decorations, and even though there are at least 10 historic African American locations on Witherspoon Street, starting on Nassau Street, the only designated site is the house where Paul Robeson was born. We do not need to spend thousands of dollars to designate long overdue and well-deserved historic sites in Princeton. It is our request, with your support, to see that noted sites in our communities are designated as historic. It is owed to our ancestors and lifelong residents who, through their dedicated work ethic, their struggle to establish businesses, schools, and community sites, basically made Princeton the historic town we wish to preserve. It may not be possible to designate all noted places in Witherspoon-Jackson area. However, it is owed to a community whose colored, Negro, Black, and Italian residents since the 17th century have been this town's backbone as slaves, servants, maids, child caregivers in the homes of wealthy residents, restaurants, the Nassau Inn, the Nassau Club, the Peacock Inn, as cooks, janitors, waiters, University Eating Club cooks and waiters, university builders, landscapers, and all establishments that were not welcomed as patrons. In addition, our families were entrepreneurs, grocery store and restaurant owners, beauty salon and barbershop owners, laborers, educators, lawyers, physicians, and law enforcement and civic employees. If it were not for our families, for many generations of service in Princeton, there would not be a Princeton as it is today. Every corner on Witherspoon Street, from Nassau Street to Birch Avenue, is steeped in African American and Italian history. It is owed to our ancestors and to those of us who are the descendants to honor and preserve the places and legacies that over 113 African American families and many Italian families have established in Princeton. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on this ordinance? Did you have another comment, Mr. Muller?
Yeah, I was going to respond to Kip's point. I actually think it's a good idea. We could add it later as an amendment, although I think you could actually do it tonight if you wanted to. I don't think it's a substantial amendment, which in substantiality is measured in terms of the ordinance as a whole, but I would defer to Trish on that.
Wait, which change are you doing?
Actually, there would be two. One would be in the definition of historic site, and we have the same change in historic features and historic structures, which would include anything on a comprehensive list prepared by the Historic Preservation Commission, and then in the powers of the Historic Preservation Commission, we'd add an additional section saying is to prepare a comprehensive list of historic sites, structures, and features. But as I say, I would defer to Trish on that. If the preference would be to we'd have that as a separate amendment, we could certainly do that.
Would that require us to have that comprehensive list? Is it or the master plan list, or?
The issue really is you can amend the master plan, or the planning board can amend the master plan at any time. So if there are additional sites that need to go on that list that's in the master plan, it can be amended. I know there have been discussions between the planning board and the Historic Preservation Commission to do that. So whether we change the language tonight or you just charge HPC, just as you did about the archaeological protocols, to look at updating the list, because the planning board really looks to HPC to do that updating of the list, and then they review it for incorporation into the master plan. So you could do that at any time.
So you're talking about the same list, it's just right now we're calling it the master plan list, but you're talking about not calling it, keeping it separate from the master plan, maybe. Is that what?
Well, that was the Battlefield Society's suggestion.
Yeah.
I think Lee's point of view is absolutely valid, too, that there'd actually be more vetting of the site structures and features if it was recommendations from the Historic Preservation Commission to the Planning Board.
Right. It's just cleaner, I think, if you put it in the master plan, because that's a document that's required to always be there. If there's a list and nobody looks at it for 5 years at HPC, you kind of don't know where it is, whereas the master plan will always be there. That's part of the reason why we were saying it should be in the master plan, so that people know where it is, where to go for the list.
Well, would it make it easier to add sites to the list if it were in a separate list? That's what I'm interested in, streamlining the process.
Can I actually ask a related question? I apologize for interrupting, but if I understand correctly, right now in the proposed language, either the planning board, through amending the master plan, or the governing body can designate a site as a historic site. And this the proposed change would extend the same power to the Historical Preservation Commission. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so the question is whether to extend that power directly or whether to ask them to continue to work through the planning board as they've done to modify the master plan. Right? That's what it comes down to?
Yeah, and as Lee said, just to elaborate on his comments as well, the master plan certainly is a recognized document in the municipal land use law. So if there was questions of the validity of that approach, that would add some legitimacy to going that route.
The other rationale, if I can just jump in real quick, for putting it in the master plan is it does require a public hearing. So Jenny, you're correct. It's a little bit higher standard, but I think it should be. And there'll be a public hearing, which means those property owners will at least have an opportunity to discuss it as well. And I think that was a lot of the thought in terms of trying to have it in the master plan rather than having it here or there.
Well, can the Historic Sites Commission do it with, the Historic Preservation Commission do it without a public hearing? Is that, because if the public...
I don't know their procedures. They might, as a practice, hold a hearing on it, but I don't think they're required to, whereas the planning board is required under the MLUL to hold a public hearing on its master plan amendment.
Ms. Butler, did you have a question or comment?
Well, regardless of how the list gets generated, we still have a kind of manpower issue as to who's going to work on the list, who will have responsibility for creating the list, because, and this is no disrespect to any of our employees or the Historic Preservation Commission, they're pretty busy. So we, and particularly with regard to the archaeology, I think I mentioned this before, that we will need additional funding for a outside consultant. There's just really, that's a very specialized field that we would, we're just not equipped to handle at this point. But we also need some additional help just generating the list. And I don't, regardless of how we write the ordinance, who's going to get those?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. As a practical matter, that's the most important aspect of this, of having the resources that can, so that the list can be done.
And I don't know how we, as a council, would voice our commitment to getting that done, or, whether you would want to speak to Elizabeth about what she sees as, what kind of support she would need, and then come back to us so we can approve it. I'm looking to you a little bit for how you would want to handle that, but it's not going to get done if we keep at it the way we've been doing it.
And again, what I would need is just direction from council. I'd go back to staff and we could give you an input on, how we could get it done if that's the wish of the council.
It seems like the consensus from council and from the public is that there's interest in creating a list. So
and reviewing the list we've got and adding to it, making sure that it is the best list possible.
So we can come back to you with a plan and how you get that done.
And also then the archaeology, we know that we're approving something that probably isn't state-of-the-art with regard to our archaeology ordinance, but we do want to get
So is
moving.
this an amendment, or we're going to hold?
Well, it sounded like there was interest in continuing with the regular process, or maybe I didn't hear it correctly.
I'm not sure what...
Well, I think there might be validity to keeping it in the master plan, but if we simultaneously have a commitment that we're going to work on it from a staff perspective, would that be?
Well, can you outline the one thing that I feel about the master plan is it seems like it always takes so many meetings to get things approved. Could we get this, can sites be approved without a subcommittee meeting, or do we have to have a subcommittee meeting and a master plan, a planning board meeting just to approve sites?
That's more of a process question for the planning board, I think, as to how they do it. And Jenny, you sit on the planning board, so you can work with them to streamline the process. I think what's important tonight, though, is really to remember we need to get a merged ordinance done. We've been at it for over a year. I think a couple of good minor changes have been pointed out. You could either amend the ordinance tonight, or you could just adopt it as it is, and we can always come back. We routinely go back. Mr. DeShield has already said, staff will come back to you with a plan about, what the resources needed, whether it's staff or consultants or what, to work with HPC through coming up with a better list.
I do have to say, for other committees that work on a project, they often want it to be included in the master plan because it does give it, it gives it some history, so that in 5 years or 10 years, when none of us are here, and maybe there's different people on the Historic Preservation Committee, the master plan is always there, and I think there's something to be said for just good governance, to put things there that you care about, that you want to persist.
As I said earlier, it does give enhanced validity to it because it's an officially recognized document. And I thought Lee also made a good point about the public hearing aspect of it.
Right.
Okay, so let's leave it.
Okay, so
leave the list in the master plan.
So is there, first I just want to make sure before I'm going to officially close the public hearing, is everybody done who wanted to say something about this ordinance? Mayor Floyd, come on.
Jim Floyd, 64 Harris Road. It's not too noisy for me, sir. I live right around the corner from it. In your latest deliberations 5 minutes ago, I would hope that you would not preclude a way for the public to give some input. Counsel, I see you nodding your head in accord. Thank you, and I agree with you. Because when I think in terms of Ms. Satterfield's presentation regarding the Witherspoon Street, as you all call the corridor, as we call Witherspoon Street residential homes, we would like to continue the democratic process of community input. And certainly as you debated, I would totally agree with the opportunity for public hearings. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anybody who hasn't spoken on this yet who would like to? I think we have to, just one person gets one shot, just so that we have, because we have another public hearing coming up. All right, with that, I'd like to close the public hearing, and I do want to thank all the members of the Historic Preservation Commission who've worked really hard over many years on this ordinance, and to thank you in advance for the work you'll be doing in coming up with the list as well. And is there a motion?
I'll move to adopt the ordinance.
Second.
It's moved by Ms. Crumiller and seconded by Mr. Liverman. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Aye.
Ms. Crumiller?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Simon?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. And I also want to thank Ms. Butler as liaison to that commission, too, for all your work on it. All right. Our next public hearing tonight is for an ordinance by Princeton regulating the hours of operation of restaurants, retail food establishments, retail sales, and personal services businesses on properties within or abutting a residential zone. And we, when we introduced this ordinance a few meetings ago, there clearly was not unanimity on council, and it's likely to be a close vote again if we were to vote on this. And as everybody can see, Council President Miller is not here tonight, and we will still have the public hearing because it was noticed and all of you are here today, and so we want to have that public hearing tonight. But I would ask council to consider extending the public hearing and waiting to have the vote until our special meeting, which is on Monday, December 15th, just so we can have all of council here. Yeah, Ms. Crumiller.
Although if someone else changes their mind, then it wouldn't matter, so we should.
That is true, too.
So maybe we can do a straw poll.
Okay. So with that, I don't know if there's any introductory comments or questions from council, or if we should go ahead and open up the public hearing. Yes, Ms. Carmelo?
I have a procedural question.
Yes.
The ordinance committee has talked about creating some standing rules, and you're asking that we postpone a vote on this, but I think going forward, it would be nice to have our colleagues request the vote. We don't know whether Bernie really, I mean, we could assume he cares about it, but we don't really know. So we only have one more meeting at which we could really deliberate and hold a vote. And so if someone is absent on the 15th, then will we continue it? We'll have to reintroduce it at the beginning of next year. Is that what we'll do?
Yeah, well, I would hope everybody would be there on the 15th.
Well, I hope so too, but I thought Bernie was going to be here tonight. So if somebody's not here on the 15th, then we'll reintroduce it in the new year? Is that?
I would say that if we're going to have a close vote, I would prefer that all council could be here. But it doesn't, it's just a request.
I would just add that in the interests of collegiality and comedy, this is what we've done in the past, and we've had close issues. So I understand Councilwoman Butler's point, and we're getting near the end of the year. It complicates things, but I think it's consistent with our past practice to make sure when something is close, to make sure everybody gets to be here. So that seems to me to be fair.
No, I'm not arguing that it's not fair, but I just...
Right, I agree that I think it would be, I would prefer if we had a policy where the person who is not going to be there requests that we don't vote on it, because that it might decrease the number of postponements. If we are just assuming that he's requesting that, but he hasn't actually said it.
I would support a policy like that going forward.
Yep, that's fine. Okay, are there any other comments from up here?
Oh, I had a question about the safety issue, and I guess our chief isn't here anymore, our police chief. Did he address the safety issue of whether did you talk about this in public safety?
We have talked about it in public safety, and he didn't express any particular views about, gosh, I'm trying to land, do you remember? No, we did discuss it, and there was not any particular.
Well, I mean, we don't find the Wawa to be a hotbed of any particular criminal activity, so I don't, right? I mean...
Well, we didn't talk about the Wawa specifically. I mean, of course, the difference is that the Wawa is not abutting residential communities, and this is...
No, but if we're talking about crime, there's no reason that would be...
No, I mean, I think the issue is that nationally there is a body of evidence that relates to 24-hour stores, but we know that different communities are different, so, you can extrapolate many things from different studies, and so I wouldn't want to speak for him, but he also did not have a strongly held views.
Well, we know from the police report that there's not a problem at the Wawa.
Right, I think that's the best comparison. Also, it's not next to a residential zone, but it is a convenience store.
Mr. Simon?
Just to confirm, Ms. Cecil, there's no concern with extending the public hearing to next week, correct? There's no legal issue with that?
No, we looked into it. It's fine. I mean, it is a special meeting. What Linda McDermott will do is just publish a notice in the newspaper to make it clear that this will be added to the agenda for the 15th, but there's time to do that legally. It's fine for you to extend the hearing to then.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'd like to open up the public hearing. And can I just get a show of hands of who is interested in speaking on this? Okay. So I'd ask that if we could just use the honor code a little bit. So if you didn't get a chance to speak at the introduction, I want to give the people who didn't get a chance to speak at the last meeting first chance tonight if they want it. And if you did speak at the last meeting, if you could just get towards the end of the line. But we're going to try to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak tonight. And in order to do that, if you can respect the 3-minute or less time. You have to do it from the mic.
Will the same process hold true next week? I mean, will it be another public hearing to speak to Mr. Miller, who's not here?
He will watch, we have it all on video.
Okay.
And so I will ask him to watch for tonight. So if you make comments tonight, you don't have to make them again next week. It will really be a continuation of tonight.
Just curious. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification.
Just to sort of put a fine point on that clarification, though, again, Ms. Cecil, we will have a public hearing at that next meeting. We will have to by law, correct?
Well, I mean, actually, you could either close the public hearing tonight and simply vote on the 15th, but I believe that the mayor's desire is to keep the public hearing open so that if there are people who can't be here tonight to comment, that they'd have that opportunity. Is that correct, Mayor? And that was
I would prefer, if we're going to vote on it, to allow people to speak.
I mean, that would certainly be my recommendation. I mean, legally, you could do it whichever way you'd like.
No,
that would
I
be my
prefer to
suggestion.
allow people to speak as well. I just want to make sure nobody walks out of here with the assumption that there will not be another opportunity to speak if they so choose.
Right. But I think at the same time, if you've said it tonight, you don't need to say it again next Monday.
If I said it the last time, do I have to say it again, or?
You're welcome to, since you've made the trek up. And I just want to invite everybody else to line up behind Mayor Floyd.
I'm not running for anything, so don't worry about it. Thank you. While they're lining up, Jim Floyd, 64 Harris Road. This is simply a reminder that the zoning board does have I don't know what's a privilege or a right to grant a variance for off-street parking. If we close at 11 or 12, it takes an hour for most people to get to their cars while they talk and make those same loud noises. I urge you to look at two things. To look at whether or not we're going to continue granting this off-street parking or off-site parking, off-site parking, and what impact that has by the time a person gets to their car. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just a reminder, Mayor Floyd did it perfectly, but just to make sure you state your name, and if the person before you is taller or shorter, to adjust the mic so you hear your voice booming through the room, so it's recorded on tape.
I'm Gail Ullman. I live at 12 Maple Street. Am I coming through? I've lived at Maple Street for 30 years, and one of the houses probably closest to Nassau Street and maybe most impacted by whatever happens on Nassau Street. On the other hand, I'm going to be here tonight asking you to use caution in proceeding with this ordinance. My concern, I've written to you, I think already, explaining to you why I thought the ordinance didn't respond to the issues that I've heard the opponents raise. So I took a look at the revised ordinance, and perhaps this was there in the first one, but let me just read to you one of the whereases. This is the third, which follows two others which more or less state the reasons for this ordinance. But the third is this: to reduce the incidence of disorderly conduct and criminal activities, including loitering, littering, public drinking, drug dealing, noise disturbance, and other unlawful acts during the late night and early morning hours, which would lead to a commensurate reduction in the need for police presence and calls for police service in or close proximity to residential areas. My concern is the reason for this ordinance, which are listed and which I've just spoken. None of these circumstances exist at the moment, and I believe the ordinance is based on fear rather than reason. Fear of bad people coming in crowds to our neighborhood and being rowdy. I think fear is a bad reason to make a policy. Fear of something unknown is even less rational. Who are we afraid of? Do we think that criminals will come to our neighborhood to frequent a store that may be open between 2 and 5? And has anyone checked to see when criminals lurk? Only between 2 and 5? Has anyone noticed that the stores that already exist in our neighborhood close much earlier than 2 because there's no business during those hours? Are we worried about rowdy students who in fact barely come to Nassau Street at all and much less seem to be rowdy? I sit on the planning board, as have 3 of you, and there we attempt to consider the wider consequences of a decision on an individual application, whether short-term solutions may create long-term problems. And sometimes we make decisions that we know will anger neighbors of an applicant because we believe there is a larger community good to be served. Frankly, I don't know what the consequences of passing this ordinance will be, and I think that's a problem. I suspect that customers of these retail stores will be graduate students and their spouses, as I once was, looking for a place to buy food when the urge hits them because their lives aren't terribly organized. Your lawyer has told you that unlike the case of land use ordinances, you have the capability of reconsidering and passing this ordinance when the eventual circumstances of an all-night business brings problems to the neighborhood. I urge you to wait and base this ordinance on facts, not fears.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Marty Schneiderman. I live at 47 Murray Place, and I want to thank Councilor very much for drafting this ordinance and bringing it up for discussion and vote. I think it's very important to take a look at the history of this. The first draft that Lee Solo put together and so on has been modified. It's been changed. It's been revised since then. It's been revised in particular response to what residents have said and what Mayor Lempert and Mr. Solo have done in terms of meeting with the merchants to understand what their expressed concerns were about this. I think it's of particular importance to note the revisions are not trivial, they're rather significant in some respects in terms of what's been proposed here. The concept of proximity between retail property and the residents went from within 200 feet to being adjacent to that. And I think the important thing to recognize is that we know, as was discussed earlier, that we have a special town, a vibrant town, one that we want to encourage like that. However, there needs to be some reason to what that's going to be. And that doesn't mean necessarily 24 hours a day for all properties everywhere in our particular town. So I think that the kinds of compromises that have been made have been very significant here. I think that the ordinance as it is reasonable, it's mild, and it's wise in its current arrangements. It's accommodation of retail operations having 6 days a year that they can be open 24/7 in response to the things that happen in our town. Reunions and the like are important to keep in mind. The fact that closure from 2 to 5 a.m. in many ways parallels what common practice is today, and things like the shopping center and the business districts and the center business district and so on are exempted from this, as is the university. All sensible kinds of things. Yes, it is the university. Any retail property on the university campus is not included in the ordinance. It specifically says that that's an exception. So I think that what's most important is that our town wants to be vibrant and wants to have operations in different kinds of ways, but we want it to be during reasonable hours, and that's what's being proposed, and we encourage and invite you to vote yes for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we proceed with public comment, can I just get a factual clarification? Because Mr. Schneiderman just said something which I believe to be factually inaccurate, and there was also something in an email that was similarly inaccurate. Just so I understand and make sure that I've got the understanding correctly, the central business district is not entirely excluded from this, nor is the shopping center at all excluded from this. Am I correct? Correct. Thank you.
Isabel Contention, 46 Maple Street. I've lived on Maple Street for 14 years and have been connected to Princeton for 30. I'm here in asking for support of the many neighbors who will be impacted more directly than I because of the location on the street, but more importantly because I believe in the democratic process. I believe the ordinance as it is now is a compromise. Unlike majority wins, real democracy is a careful balancing of rights, often requiring great wisdom to adjudicate. Council, you've heard from many voices here, many different constituents arguing for different interests and needs and concerns. Some people are concerned that this ordinance is done out of fear, that it will impact businesses. But the issue really at play here is one that transcends the specifics of this particular bill, and is whether we believe in compromise and negotiation in balancing our interests in our local governance. Perhaps we are also witnessing a reaction against citizen disempowerment when interests clash in favor of commercial interests. What better place to show that compromise is possible than at the local level? That we see that concerns are heard, considered, and acted upon. The passing of this ordinance would be beneficial to our town, not only for the specifics, because of the process. I believe that this is an example of the democratic process. I would also like to add that many of us were surprised to hear that an ordinance limiting hours of business operations was not already on the books because of the culture of closing businesses at 2 a.m. and our 2 to 5 parking ban. And so I believe that this would codify what is really current practice. And with the exceptions that have been carved out and all of the changes in the ordinance, I believe it's even more clear. So for these reasons, I urge you to pass this ordinance.
Thank you. And did you state your name at the beginning? I just want to make sure.
Isabel Kentengian, Kentengian.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, guys. I've got a hat head, so I can't take my hat off. But the two people before me...
You need to speak into the mic, too.
Is that better?
Really into the mic.
Yes? Yes. Okay. The two people that spoke before me, I think, spoke...
Name?
Oh,
Wendy,
I'm
you need to
sorry.
say your name.
Wendy Ludlam, 229 South Harrison Street. I think they spoke beautifully, and I concur with what they've said. It's a really cold night, and there were other people that wanted to come, but at the end they thought, you know, no one ever listens to us. I'm not going to show up. And I think that's really too bad. That I think there is a feeling that the community and the neighborhoods aren't always heard, and their priorities aren't always acknowledged. And I think what was said before was that this is a really good compromise ordinance, because it takes consideration of the rhythm of our town, so that merchants can thrive as they are already, and that we can be particular about what we do and how we run our town and how people can live, and not feel that commercial enterprise is going to be open 24/7 when it's in a neighborhood. And so I think there's a lot of merit in this, and I think it's incredibly reasonable, and I would hope that the merchants, should be happy with this, and that we can work together, live together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Robert Bratman, 259 Nassau Street, which is the West Coast Video Building. Council, I'd like to discuss with you fairness, because I think fairness is fundamental to what you're doing here tonight. My family has owned 259 Nassau Street since about 1964. We've paid over $1 million in taxes, and I don't think anyone else, or probably very few people in this room, can say that. Over $1 million in taxes to the town of Princeton. We've had a Joanna Farms there that was open 24/7. We've had a Wawa there that was open 24/7. My parents made their living with a Viking furniture store that had more traditional business hours. So the building's been vacant for about 10 years, and we wanted to put a bank there. And we thought that a bank was a good use because it freed up parking. Banks are traditionally 9 to 4. There'd be plenty of parking there for all the restaurants. My good friend Jack Morrison would have a place for his patrons to park. But the same vocal minority that is opposed to 7-Eleven came out and said, we don't want a bank because it's not lively, it doesn't encourage community, there's no food, it's not a walking destination, and they were persuasive in getting you all to vote for an ordinance that limits one bank in the area, and my good friend Mr. Carnival now has that bank, so I can't have a bank. So what did I do? I looked for an alternative use. I understood that people wanted food, they wanted liveliness. Well, unfortunately, there's not enough vertical density for a full-on supermarket. We know that Davidson's and Wild Oats came and went. So what did we find? We found 7-Eleven, and 7-Eleven is not your parents' 7-Eleven. It's more upscale now. They have healthier food choices. And now what did we hear? Well, 7-Eleven's going to attract crime. There's going to be people doing drugs. There's going to be fornicating and urinating in the back parking lot. Never heard that when it came to the bank, but now when it's 7-Eleven and this vocal minority doesn't want 7-Eleven, that is what we're hearing right now. 7-Eleven's business model is a 24/7 store. If you all pass this ordinance, there is a good shot that 7-Eleven will not come there. Now, another tenant that I've worked hard to try to find is going to go by the wayside. And when you apply common sense to this whole thing, if there is crime, which I don't think there is, what does crime abhor? It abhors lights. It abhors video surveillance, which 7-Eleven said it will have. It abhors a Title 39 right to come onto the property, which 7-Eleven said it would have. So the very complaints that people are talking about would be resolved through having a 24-hour store there. And one last thing, please. The people that bought next to these properties, these commercial properties, got a discount when they bought their property. They didn't pay as much because it was next to a commercial zone. Thank you. I would ask, though, that you show leadership in making this vote.
Thank you.
Alexi Asmus, 32 Maple Street. I'd like to say just a remark about the bank situation. The zoning was redone and banks were allowed at the request of owners. Initially, the zoning, the old East Manassas Street zoning, there were no banks. There was a professional survey done of the neighborhood, and 68% of people in the neighborhood opposed banks. And our council changed the zoning to allow banks after that survey. So that's the history of the bank situation in the neighborhood. There seems to be a misperception that this is just an East Nassau Street neighborhood issue, and that is not the case. I want to know that I became involved with this as a trustee of Princeton Citizens for Sustainable Neighborhoods when an attorney on Jefferson Road did an extensive study of the opening hours of business in the town, determined that this ordinance would not affect anybody at all. And she asked me if I would conduct a survey and see who from the PCSN list was in support of it, which I did. We have over 700 people. I only got a response from 35. They were all for the ordinance limiting town. Only 6 of those 35 people were from the East Nassau Street neighborhoods. I have had one person communicate with me by email who's not for it since then, who is on our list. But this is not a East Nassau Street neighborhood issue. People in the Jefferson Moore neighborhood and in the Witherspoon Jackson neighborhood are very concerned about 24-hour retail on Witherspoon Street next to their homes. And I think it is reasonable when your neighbor asks you, please pass an ordinance so that next to my home there cannot be a 24-hour store. I think it is reasonable to do that for your neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Abby Reynolds. I live on 40 Princeton Avenue, right off of Nassau Street. I have lived in this town for over 40 years. I bought the house that I grew up in from my parents, and while we may not have paid $1 million, trust me, we've paid a lot in taxes, and I think many residents in the area in East Nassau Street and around have paid their fair share of taxes. I have deep roots in the community. I married a guy that I went to high school with. He grew up on Jefferson Road, so I have a long-standing interest in this, and my husband and I moved back to Princeton because of the small-town nature that it has, and it's one that we want to encourage and thrive. You know, like I said, I grew up, I went to Johanna Farms to buy milk. That was my job, and it was even called Jack and Jill before that. That's how far I go back. And I've worked in the private sector and the public sector, and I understand how important it is to have thriving businesses. I've seen Princeton change over the years. I don't want to change that, and I don't think this ordinance will change that. As the folks who have spoken previously to me, before me, I think we all agree that this is very reasonable. It's codifying what has in fact been common practice. For those that do need a 24-hour type of convenience store, there's the Wawa and there's the new convenience store at the bottom of Harrison Street and Route 1 where the new gas station is. So it's not like people don't have other options. I was in Stamford, Connecticut yesterday, and I was speaking to a woman, and she asked where I was from, and I said Princeton, and her comment was, oh, you're so lucky. People want what we have here, and I think this ordinance will help preserve it. So what are we asking for? I'm asking that you support this ordinance. It's reasonable. It has been worked on in conjunction with the merchants to accommodate their needs. It reflects compromise. We don't need people congregating after the bars have closed at a 24-hour establishment. There are other options where people can go. So I would urge you to consider this very reasonable ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Layla Shawbender. I live at 47 Maple Street, formerly lived at 107 Autumn Hill Road. I don't mean to upstage the previous presenter, but I met my husband at Littlebrook School when he was in kindergarten and I was in second grade. I have married a younger man. But I now have the good fortune of living in a wonderful neighborhood. And I think that the sort of crux of this issue is really about the fact that it's a residential neighborhood. Basically, I think that there are probably appropriate places to put 24-hour convenience stores or 24-hour businesses, but I'm not convinced that they belong in very close proximity to a residential neighborhood. I don't know that, I realize we do not know that there will be an increase in crime. I think if you do a Google search, you will see that there's a propensity for higher amounts of crime in 24-hour convenience store areas. I think that we run the risk of potential litter. If I recall correctly, when Burger King moved into Nassau Street, there was some kind of requirement that they had to keep the litter cleaned up. I wonder if there's going to be a similar sort of thing required if a store like a 7-Eleven moves into town. I'm concerned about an increase in noise and light pollution, an increase in traffic on Maple Street. I'm also concerned a little bit about an increase in foot traffic on Maple Street. You know, there was a recent mugging in our neighborhood, and the more people who are walking around in the wee hours of the night run a risk of increasing the amount of crime targeted. I also feel that this will change the quality of our neighborhood, and I would hate to see us lose this nice residential community that we have in the Tree Streets. So it is for that reason that I encourage you to support your vote from the November 17th meeting and endorse this endorsement and make it official, this ordinance and make it official. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Andrea Stein from 23 Murray Place. I'd like to express my support for the ordinance. I think there's been a lot of compromise here, and it's a very good ordinance. And I also feel that there's been a lot of talk of fear, but not enough about quality of life. And to me, that's what this whole ordinance is about. As a resident on Murray Place, very close to where the Davidsons was and many other businesses, we had to put up with a lot of inconveniences, but that was fine because we had the convenience of going to these stores, and we put up with it. But I think this is taking inconvenience to a rather extreme step, by having businesses open 24 hours. The noises that you hear from stores during the day are tolerable, but to hear them at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning is not. And those are slamming doors, people loitering in the parking lot talking, cars idling. I mean, it goes on. And those are not symptoms of crime, but it's a nuisance. And I don't think that's something that we as residents have to put up with. So I would urge you to, really vote for this ordinance. I think the downside of not passing it is greater than the upside. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Lou Carnavale. I own 257 Nassau Street, which is next door to Mr. Bradman. And I'm also the guy with the bank. And some of you know what we had to go through to get the bank, which is a nice, quiet, clean business. I oppose this, and simply because more rules and regulations that are put in, this ordinance is looking for a problem that does not exist. If, God forbid, I'm a neighbor there, if there is a problem, you have the power to change it. So why pass a law before it's necessary? The other thing I would strongly suggest, if you do pass this ordinance, make it for everybody, including the university. We as merchants in the street want the business and the people from the university, students, faculty, workers. The university is very obvious, is becoming more and more self-sufficient. Their housing, their food, transportation, and so we're becoming two towns. And to have one having special privileges and times, and the other being limited, is unfair. And it's counterproductive to what we want. I want an integrated town, university and town, to be as much together as possible, not separated in either way. I hope you don't pass it, but thank you.
Thank you.
Rob Dodge, 32 Maple Street. I've heard arguments last month and tonight on why Woodland should not pass the ordinance. For example, it would not solve all the problems of noise that we have in the residential neighborhoods adjoining commercial neighborhoods. It wouldn't solve the problems of all the robberies that we're having in Princeton from our homes. It wouldn't solve the problem of the trash left in the people's lawns by out of town or out of neighborhood visitors. It wouldn't solve the problem of the muggings we have, because those muggings occurred before 2 a.m. So clearly this ordinance would support that. I was thinking about this as I was helping my daughter collect canned goods for the John Witherspoon Middle School food broke which to benefit local food banks. The JWMS group raised 8,753 pounds of food, and they donated that to local food banks right here in the Mercer County area. And I asked my daughter, you know, this food is not going to go to Appalachia, where we just read about the people who did not have enough food for Thanksgiving. It's not going to New York City to help some of the homeless people we saw last weekend that needed food. Why bother do anything if we can't solve every problem? And her response was, I can't change the world, but I can make a difference in one person's life. And I asked council to consider that logic. Will this ordinance prevent all the violent crime that we are having in Princeton? Will it stop the assaults? Will it stop the muggings? Will it stop the thefts that occur before 2 a.m.? Maybe not. Will it stop noise that occurs at 1 a.m., 1:30, 1:45? No, maybe not. But after 2, sure. The police in Princeton are clearly understaffed, and violent crime is on the rise in downtown neighborhoods. And it's getting worse every year. Maybe this ordinance cannot prevent violent crime in Princeton, but it can make a dent in the crime and the noise and the trash that we do have, at least between 2 and after 2 a.m. and before 5 a.m. And I was thinking back about the other thing, just as I'm waiting in line here, about let's wait for the problem to occur before before we pass a law. And I think back to the story I told last week about my friend Franny, who was murdered working at a 24-hour store. And I was thinking about Martin County is actually bigger than Princeton, and so that would make that council much more powerful. But you know what? It's too late. She's dead. No matter how powerful that council is, or how powerful Princeton is, you know what? Once the crime occurs, we can't bring them back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. John Marshall, President of the Princeton Merchants Association. You've heard from me before, but just to recap, we're 140 members. Every single store has to be by our bylaws within Princeton. On behalf of the PMA, I want to thank you all for defining the proposed ordinance as pertaining only to those areas adjoining the residential area. PMA reiterates its hope that if this ordinance moves forward, you will consider exempting the Central Business District, the Princeton Shopping Center, and perhaps the Clifftown areas as existing merchant areas. But for the record, I wanted to say something not only to the council, but to all the residents who have these concerns here. The PMA does not disagree with you on on this matter whatsoever. We disagree with the method of implementation. Instead of a new ordinance, the PMA has always embraced utilizing existing ordinances and zoning to resolve current and future issues. Zoning curtails use, but it allows for the possibility of relief in suitable instances, whereas the proposed ordinance would not. It would close the door. In its current form, the PMA respectfully requests that you do not pass this ordinance. But as always, the PMA greatly appreciates the opportunity to come before you, to work with council, and take part in these and other important, respectful community discussions. And as Liz said earlier, we would like to remind everybody to shop local this holiday season, as every day in the year. And just remember, when you shop local, almost 400% more of your spent money stays here in the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe Small, Hawthorne Avenue, Tree Streets. I think Ms. Ullman started this out properly. This is an imaginary problem. It's a problem which doesn't exist. There's no documentation at the previous Jack and Jill, Johanna Farms, Wawa in this very same location, Wawa on the university campus, of noise, littering, crime that can't be handled for the second reason that this ordinance does nothing. There are other ordinances to deal with every single imagined problem that has been raised. And third, between 2 and 5 a.m., if any of you can deal with just 3 hours of sleep a night, it's a silly thing. You want to be effective, you want to close the stores, close them for at least 8 hours when everybody sleeps, or don't close them at all. It's silly. So you haven't done three things. You haven't dealt with a real problem, you haven't dealt with something that current ordinances don't cover, and you haven't dealt with a meaningful limitation on time. Now let me tell you what it does do. It favors the Wawa over 7-Eleven. It favors the university as a landlord over Mr. Bratton. It favors an institution subject to all kinds of privileges and tax exemptions, as opposed to people who pay, as Mr. Bratman has told you, $1 million in taxes. You want to be hostile to new businesses coming in, to devaluing the property values of commercial property in Princeton, such that the tax burden will shift back to these residents who are so afraid that they bought the property knowing full well the use of all the neighboring properties, and now they're crying. It invites a lawsuit by Mr. Bratton, the owner of the property, for having deprived him of certain rights on any number of grounds which we don't need to go into. You're going to cause us to spend more money in legal fees like you did with the kerfuffle around the former chief of police. We don't know how much that has cost, whether it's being paid by our insurance carrier and going to raise our liability rates, or just money going straight out to lawyers to suits that we have a very good chance to lose, favoring some complaining local citizens versus every other taxpayer in town. Finally, it favors the university against commercial interest. It favors the university as a landlord collecting rent. And as Mr. Schmierer told us when we dealt with the pilots and the university's commercial interests, Ms. Howard, who's on the faculty of the university and receives her pay, Ms. Lempert, who's married, and I see both of you smile when somebody agrees with you and frown when they disagree. You should step down immediately. And one last thing that came up tonight, the unfairness of telling the citizens that a vote will be taken tonight, and not for the convenience of the citizens, but for the convenience of somebody who voted with the mayor, you're going to put the vote off. It smells, it doesn't do anything good, and it makes a lot of us who haven't appeared before you for a long time because we were upset by the way you behaved, appear again and tell you how upset we are by the non-professional citizens of this community who have all of our interests and all the taxpayers' interests at heart, and not just those of a few people who got their houses at bargain prices because they were near commercial properties. Thank you.
Hi, Shirley Satterfield, 30 Quarry Street. This is just a little bit of history. When I was growing up, there were no stores that stayed open past 9 o'clock. In fact, they were closed by 6 o'clock. And even at the early closing, they made a profit. And when the stores were, and there were several trendy stores that took its place. I remember when Nassau Street folded up by 5 o'clock. That's the term that we used to state the stores were closed and residents were home. Princeton even had blue laws that required that no stores were open on Sundays. Please consider the residents who want to live quietly, raise their children in a safe neighborhood, and who ask that you respect and the request to honor the retail hour ordinance. And instead of talking about stores, why can't it be a nice little park there? There are a lot of restaurants across the street, and people can get their food and go to the park and relax and enjoy an open space. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen Schultz, Pine Street. First of all, I didn't think I got a bargain on my house, and I live in a commercial district, so I'll have to think again. I actually wonder, well, let me say it this way. My wife and I went out last night, 10 o'clock, wanted to get something to eat. This is not the first time we've done this, not the last time we'll do it. Guess what? We had to get ice cream. Nothing was open. I don't understand why this is such an objectionable issue if nothing's open anyway past 10 o'clock. You know, what's it going to change? Nothing. The other thing I'm curious about is how many of the folks, with the exception of Gail Ullman, who are voting against this ordinance actually live within the area, and how this is going to affect them. How many of these people actually had a car, drunk driver come barreling at 2 in the morning, hit a car across the street, end up in my driveway when I went out and he was being cuffed and tow trucks had to come. It was a, 3-hour ordeal. I'm going to guess none. This ordinance is going to help prevent more of this. It's not going to prevent all of it. It's not going to affect, in my opinion, stores, merchants' business because they're closed anyway, but it's going to put some nice boundaries around what could happen in the future. I'm for it, obviously. I urge all of you to vote for it, and thank you. It's in your hands.
Thank you.
Hi, Adrienne Kripke. I also live on Maple Street. And I don't have extensive prepared remarks, but I just wanted to go on record as supporting this ordinance, which I think is very reasonable, and I share the perspective of many of my neighbors. And I also share some of the concerns of my good friend and neighbor, Gail Ullman, in some of the language of the ordinance, some of the initial language, with some of what seems to be sort of fear or scaremongering in some of the expressions about why it's needed. But I'll just tell you why I think the ordinance is a good idea. As another one of my neighbors said, I too was surprised that we needed it. I had no idea that businesses could operate between 2 and 6 in the morning. You can't park on our street between 2 and 6 in the morning. New Jersey Transit buses aren't operating, which we can hear quite well from my house, between 2 and 5 in the morning. A residential neighborhood shuts down in the middle of the night, and I don't think that a business should be operating all night long. People have said, well, if there's a lot of noise, we can address it then, but car doors that shut during normal hours, nobody pays attention to them. Buses that go by during normal hours, it's just part of the hum of the noise that just goes around in the neighborhood. But at 2 o'clock in the morning, you can hear people who talk in normal conversational tone, but you can hear them really well at 2 in the morning because they're the only ones talking on the street. And those cars that close their doors at that hour, they're the only ones making noise then. I think it's reasonable for there to even be a longer period of time of quiet. Some people have said, well, it should be, don't do the ordinance because it's it's like too little to make a difference. I think that 2 to 5 is a compromise. It's reasonable, and I do think it'll make a difference, and that's why I wanted to speak. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Adam Finkelstein. I live at 18 Aiken Avenue, and I agree with the points of many of the folks who spoke before me in favor of the ordinance, and I agree with what Adrian just said, that if you live near a business and there are people going to that business, in the wee hours of the night, those sounds will be detrimental to, the peace and quiet that we have come to expect in our neighborhood. I'd also like to respond to some of the fairness issues that were brought up, particularly in reference to businesses operating in the university. I think that there is a balance at play here, and the university may very well need to have businesses open 24 hours because they're students, and they at the university they're students who are basically up all night, and they need to go shopping too. But that doesn't have to be adjacent to somebody's home. And also, I guess responding to a comment that was made that people who bought houses at a discount because they were next to a business, they weren't expecting that the business would be operating between 2 and 5 in the morning, because it wasn't so at the time. So I don't think that they received a particular discount relative to the circumstances proposed in the ordinance, and therefore I guess in summary, I urge you to vote in favor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jeanette Hoban. I reside at 32 Witherspoon Lane. My concern, I wouldn't say it's a fear, my concern is in a different part of the neighborhood, which is Witherspoon Street, which is undergoing a lot of changes, residential to business, and now the creating of the 280 rental unit on Witherspoon Street, and directly opposite that is a delicatessen. And we are a fragile neighborhood. I believe we are a neighborhood that does experience crime. We're a neighborhood that does have successful restaurants, but I support the ordinance with care for Witherspoon Street. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak who hasn't had a chance yet? No? Okay, I want to thank everybody who came out and spoke tonight, and I want to bring it back to council and see if there's a willingness to hold this over until our meeting of the 15th.
Yeah, I don't object. I heard Mr. Small's comments in regard to thinking that this is something that's shouldn't be done, but we have set precedent on many times in regard to important votes to have full council here, and I wouldn't object to that at all. I also want to state that I'm the only one sitting here, up here, that lives directly within 50 feet from a commercial location. That's Conti's Pizzeria, where people eat pizza and they drink beer and they come out all times of night. And I'm the only one, probably, I don't know if anyone lives that close to any other establishment. And I know exactly what the neighbors are talking about. It doesn't have to be screaming and shouting. It can just be, in the evening, it could be just lower voices and doors closing and opening, and you can definitely hear it. But one thing that there is with Conti's and with myself, and I go back years when Sam Conti and Lucinda Conti was there back in the day, and we've always respected each other. So they would ask if there was something they were doing that was going longer time, they would ask us if we would mind, or we'll tell them to turn something down, and it was always a mutual respect. And I'm hoping within this neighborhood, whatever store becomes in that location, that mutual respect can definitely be there. And I think that will go a long way if that happens. So my point of view, I don't mind carrying it over for the next meeting to have Council President Miller here. It's fine with me. But I just want to thank everybody for coming out, expressing your views. And this is the democratic process. And I don't, I'm a business person, so I hear Mr. Bratman very well, and I don't want this to impede on his livelihood. But I don't think it would. I think that 7-Elevens must have I don't know, maybe they just have to be open 24 hours a day. That must be what they do. I don't know. But, I mean, it seems to me that they should just close at 2 and open at 5 or 6 or something. But that's just my point of view. Thank you.
Ms. Carter?
Well, just to move things along, has anyone changed their mind from last time? Well, I mean, just because then we can vote on it tonight if somebody has.
You have a wonderful way of cutting to the chase.
Tell us what you really need, Jenny.
Well, we can't vote on it tonight.
Yes, we can. We have to.
What I'm saying is, if someone has changed their mind,
Lance or Heather have changed their mind, then it would.
If someone has changed their mind, then we can vote on it, and we don't have to postpone the
If the
vote.
mayor has, then it would.
She wouldn't vote.
All right. Anyway, hearing no response, I think we have the answer. Let me ask a related question. For any of the colleagues who are in support of this, I have significant concerns about the ordinance, and I would like to limit the damage. One of the requests that was made was to exempt the Central Business District and the shopping center and the Clifftown Shopping Center. Is there any support for making that change among the people who are currently supporting the ordinance? Let me phrase it that way. In its current form.
I wanted to ask Mr. Solo to help respond to that first, too. And if you could also address, there was another point that I think Mr. Marshall asked about why we can't do this as part of zoning as opposed to how it's written here. And if you could address both those.
Typically, zoning may be the easier one to answer. The zoning code is a land use code, and it regulates the types of uses. This is under your police powers and is hours of operations. So typically, you won't find in a zoning code a limitation on hours. It limits the types of uses. The planning board or the zoning board could impose a condition, as one member in the audience suggested, when there's a site plan to say, you have to clean up, you have to provide extra trash receptacles, you have to provide a video, camera, you have to have certain kind of lighting or brightness. But typically you won't find in zoning any kind of hours of operation. Trishka, do you want to add anything, or I'm okay with that? I do have a concern if you start exempting a lot more things. When you get into the CBD, the shopping center, and the Clifftown Center. What we've tried to do is wherever a business as defined in the ordinance abuts a residential property, we were at 200 feet, they'll be regulated by this ordinance. We did provide a couple of exceptions. Some of those fall under it was kind of, for lack of a better term, it was a beneficial use. A pharmacy that's open 24 hours, urgent care, a veterinary care type place. So we made specific findings about that. With regard to the university, you also made a specific finding and said that they're serving a population that doesn't operate under the normal business hours, as many as you know. And it's not just the university. We did it for all the educational institutions, Rider College and the seminary as well, and exempted it because of the type of population that lives there. For the most part, with the exception of the used store we talked about, those institutions provide quite a bit of buffering around them in terms of where their business uses may be. They're only in an E zone, so they're not your typical business use. The institution would control what goes there and its localized impact. So I think, in the ordinance, we made a distinction for educational institutions, and we exempted the E zones that are for higher education. We did not for the secondary schools, HUN, PDS, Princeton Friends Schools, which are in residential areas. So we were careful in drafting the ordinance to limit that impact to be, the exemptions were just simply for either a beneficial use or the educational institutions in town that were serving a population. I think one of the speakers tonight talked about how, the students, the grad students, the faculty, they operate a little bit differently, and therefore would need more of the 24-hour. There aren't that many business uses that would have been regulated at these institutions anyhow, but we wanted to provide that exclusion. I don't know if that answered all the questions or not, but.
And just another point of clarification. So most of the central business district is not impacted by this.
A good portion of it is not. A lot of the businesses on Nassau Street don't abut a residential zone. You have to go a little bit further away. And again, that was one of the compromises we made with the business community and said, okay, rather than 200 feet, which would have involved a lot more of the properties, we made the adjacency important and said if you're adjacent, then it does. The map that we had, and there was some question on the map, that was really done for illustrative purposes to show those properties that wouldn't. So at the last discussion, I think like the Hopewell Valley Bank just down here is not adjacent to a residential property, so it would be excluded. You can build in whatever additional exclusions you want. I just caution you because